doing things. One of my absolute wonderful total geek out trips was a trip to Kennedy and get to watch SpaceX launch. I got to go in the vehicle assembly building. I got to sit in the original mission control room. Absolutely cool. We've got to get these kids out. One of the biggest problems I'm seeing is over-sheltering. And they're not learning basic things like shopping, bank account, how to save money, just real basic stuff. You know, when I was 7, I was making little bird kites, and I've got my new book there, Calling All Minds, which has my childhood projects. A lot of kids today are afraid to make mistakes, and I spent hours trying to get my little bird kite to work, and when I went to reduplicate it as an adult, it was really difficult because I couldn't get exactly the same materials. Another thing I've been doing is I go back and forth between the tech world out in Silicon Valley, all the work I've done in the meatpacking industry, working with skilled tradespeople. I've been working with people in my generation, skilled trades that I know are on the spectrum. Half of Silicon Valley's on the spectrum. Been there, seen that. And you know what else happened today? It happens with every tech company. Is audiovisual problems. Real trouble getting the PowerPoint loaded. What I can tell you, you want to have an AV problem you're going to have with a tech company. So since we had a big AV problem, that means you really are a tech company. And then you go to some crummy old convention center and it just works. That's the thing I like. And the other thing that was super interesting about the space station is that sometimes old reliable is the best thing for your life support system. They had 3 clunker IBM ThinkPads. The big, clunky, thick ones to run the life support. So what would you rather have? Old reliable? I think I trust those ThinkPads so much better than something new that hasn't been debugged by Aspiritech yet. And there's the SpaceX, the vehicle assembly building. There's the launch. The thing I can say about I got the iPhone 6, the small one. Had that phone for 2 days, and I just started taking pictures with this camera. I couldn't believe the pictures this phone could get. I just went click, click. That was beyond cool. We've got to get kids out doing stuff. You know, people think that we can do everything on computers. Well, they learned at Pixar that sometimes they have to get them off the computers and have them drawing by hand. And I've been in the meat industry for 44 years, and I watched my industry go from hand drafting to computer drafting. And we started getting strange mistakes on drawings. Things like the center of the circle is not the center of the circle. And the person who would do that was someone who had taken the computer class, but they'd never drawn by hand and they'd never built anything. They were not seeing their drawings. No, we got to get kids out doing things. That's the whole point of the Calling All Minds book. That's aimed at elementary and middle school kids, just to get them doing stuff. Schools have got to keep these classes in. Some states now, like Texas and Wisconsin and Massachusetts, are starting to put the skilled trades back in. Taking that out is the worst thing they did. You know, if I hadn't had sewing, woodworking, and art when I was in elementary school, I would have absolutely hated school. Hands-on classes also teach practical problem solving. Also, none of these things that's on this list are going to get replaced by computers. You know, theater, people still don't want to do that. Huge shortage right now of auto mechanics, welders, plumbers, electricians, and we're still going to need people to debug the stuff. We're certainly going to need that. We've got to keep these classes in. There was a study done that showed that a Nobel Prize winner in science was much more likely to get the Nobel Prize if he had a creative hobby. Interesting study. I was a lousy student, and I didn't start studying until school became a goal to becoming a scientist. And I had a really good science teacher that got me going, that got me motivated. Studying has to become a pathway to a goal. Now, one of the things that I'm seeing in a whole lot of autism meetings I go to is granddads coming up to me. Granddad often working in a technical field, computers or engineering, and he finds out he's on the spectrum when the grandkids get diagnosed. I am seeing that. So why was Granddaddy able to keep a job? Because he had a paper route when he was 11. Learned how to work. All right, here's my suggestions for learning how to work. Kids that are in the pipeline now. middle school, maybe even 11 years old, dog walking, volunteer jobs, maybe at a church or synagogue. They need to be doing a task on a schedule outside the home. High school, they need to get some real jobs. They've got to learn how to get to work on time and do a job. And I worked with skilled tradespeople. Oh, they were weird. They could build anything. And I'm very concerned about losing skills. We no longer have the skills to build certain types of food processing plants because of taking out skilled trades. Not a good thing. Now the thing is, autism in its milder forms, bipolar in its milder forms, is just part of normal brain variability. When does geeks and nerds become, autism? Okay, some of the Aspiritech employees here, boy, I've seen guys like you at Google, been there, seen that. Microsoft, been there, seen that. I'll never forget the hotel that had the gigantic Microsoft convention at it. Yep, I see lots of people on the spectrum there. So in the milder forms, it's just part of variation. A brain can be more thinking, or a brain can be more social emotional. Now there's some new research now, 2018 papers, that showed the same genes that give human beings a gigantic, huge brain are the same genes that cause autism and schizophrenia. And what happens in autism is you get an early overgrowth in the back of the brain, so you end up with maybe art department, music department, math department, that sort of thing. In schizophrenia, you don't get enough growth early on, and then during the synaptic pruning phase, where the brain prunes the bushes, in late adolescence, the network falls apart because it gets over-pruned. But it's all involved with the same genes that make us human. You're not going to get rid of it. It's a true continuous trait, and a certain amount of variation is normal variation. Now the thing I want to ask you is what would happen to some famous innovators today? Famous innovators that probably were on the autism spectrum. A lot of them had an unconventional career path. Would they be less successful today? I'm seeing too many kids ending up in the basement playing video games. And I just read the other day that that's now a diagnosis, video game addiction. Gaming industry doesn't like that very much. But what I'm seeing is I think it's going to be a lot like alcohol. A lot of people can enjoy alcohol in moderation or enjoy video games in moderation, and it's fine. But then there's some people that get addicted and they need to not be touching it. But I'm seeing some very bad outcomes with that. He's 22 years old, he's in the basement playing video games, can't get him out. No, they've got to get him out. Jane Goodall, when she did her famous work, had a 2-year secretarial degree. Would that be possible today? No. Probably not. Thomas Edison, when you read biographies on him, was probably on the spectrum. He was described as a hyperactive adult high school dropout. He probably had autism. Steven Spielberg was rejected from a top film school, bullied, dyslexic. But you know what saved him? His little Super 8 movie camera. This brings up a really important thing. Early exposure to career interest. I did not come from an ag background, so how did I get interested in the cattle industry? I was exposed to it as a teenager on my aunt's ranch. You know, students can't get interested in stuff they don't get exposed to. And I think it's really important for all students, especially now education is getting so expensive, to try careers on. Find out what you like, also find out maybe what you hate. You certainly don't want to be in a job that you hate. And Elon Musk, super interesting book here. I'll let you make your own conclusions. Totally nerdy. Bullied in high school. But another thing about him is he learned how to work at a young age, doing some really grubby, dirty jobs. Understands hard work. And there's his capsule docking up there with the space station. The dragon, its real name is Puff the Magic Dragon. And that doesn't sound very scientific, so they just call it Dragon. And then I got a chance to go to Houston. I'm in Mission Control right there, and you might wonder why there's nobody in Mission Control. Because they have blackouts. You see, there's some zones where there's no communication. Bathroom break. They got 6 minutes. And then they'll be back in there. And there's the space station simulator where I saw the IBM ThinkPads. Okay, common denominators of unique minds being successful. Growing up with lots of books and learning. Value of learning. And I'm happy to see books are coming back. I just did a talk yesterday at the American Booksellers Association for Calling All Minds. And people still like real books. And when I go on a plane, I'm happy to see lots of real books there. Early exposure to career interests. Hands-on projects. Learning how to work. Not too over-specialized. Had a great science teacher. But when I was young, I spent hours tinkering with my aviation projects, which are in Calling All Minds. Yes, and I couldn't get the exact paper for my bird kite. You're going to have to tinker to make file folders work. And internships. A Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have an arts and crafts hobby. So what would happen to these guys today? Steve Jobs is probably on the spectrum, bullied in school, and he loved calligraphy. That was his creative hobby. Einstein had no language till age 3. What would happen to him today? Now, one of the issues that often comes up with young kids that are good at math is that they do it in their head. Did you know Stephen Hawking did all of his math in his head? Because he couldn't write. Another thing that Stephen Hawking said, do something your disability doesn't affect. And doing math in his head, he could do that. He could do math in his head. You know, these guys would definitely be labeled autistic today. Too many kids getting labels. I'm getting worried that our educational system is screening them out. What's going to happen to the next Einstein? But I'm getting very concerned. Educational system is screening out a lot of really, really smart kids. And here are dyslexic people that run major businesses. What would happen to them today? How about Gary Cohn at Goldman Sachs? Horrible student. And this was a guy that when he saw opportunity, he knew how to take advantage of it. He talked himself into a job that he didn't even know how to do by hitching a ride with another guy to the airport. Really sorry about the coughing. And okay, I want to try to not cough while I say this until you record this. I want to emphasize that on your product, you need to work on selling your product. When I was working in the cattle industry, the way I sold a job is I'd lay out my drawings, my brochures, my photographs, and just show off the work. Simply sell the work. There is a scene in the HBO movie where I go up to the editor of the magazine and get his card. That's a very important scene because I would do a whole bunch of work and design something. And then I would write it up in the cattle magazine. Become a writing machine. Write about how to make things successful. Don't get too hung up on the autism stuff. The emphasis should be on the work. I never talked to clients about autism. In fact, the biggest barrier I had was being a woman. And I had to make myself 3 times better than the guys. Sell the work. And we were just discussing the thing that Bose would not want to have happen. Okay, you test the new software updates. So I'm just imagining an airline passenger. He's on a really long flight. The real influential airline passenger takes his brand new Bose headset out of the plastic in the box, plugs it into his phone, and it doesn't work. He's going to be furious. And that's the thing that you prevent. Now, as a visual thinker, I see that. I can actually make kind of a movie of that in my head. You know, a lot of people have kind of unexpected career paths. This is Tina, project manager for our new chemistry building. She was a political science major. I think being a construction manager is a much better job than political science. But sometimes you can have unexpected career paths. A lot of really creative people didn't follow conventional paths. This is one of my most important slides. This is the different kinds of minds. I am a photorealistic visual thinker. Everything I think about is a picture. So now when I visualize this flight, so I can actually create images. Yep, United Polaris business class. This is a high-end traveler, and he's going to trash that headset all over Facebook. You see, your company prevents that from happening. You know, because I'm an older businessman, and he puts it on, I'm sitting beside him, he plugs it in, and it doesn't work. And he's saying, that's a piece of garbage, I'm gonna... See, that's what you don't want to have happen. That's a worst case scenario. You see, I visualize that. And as a visual thinker, I visualize risk. I don't calculate it. I'm seeing this movie in my head that I can create of something Bose does not want to have happen. Then the other kind of thinker is the more computer person, the mathematical thinker, the programmer. They think in patterns. They don't see risk. They try to calculate risk. That is definitely not how my mind works. Now, as a photorealistic visual thinker, I can't do algebra. That screens me out of a lot of programs. Now, fortunately, Colorado State, because I've lobbied a lot about this, is now changing it so that you can do statistics to substitute for algebra. Because algebra doesn't make any sense to me. Now, there's certain fields you need it. I'm not going to be a chemist. Definitely not. And then you have the person who's a verbal facts thinker, who knows everything about, some product. There's different kinds of minds, and they work together. Let's take the iPhone, for example. Steve Jobs was an artist. That's why the phone was easy to use. But the engineers had to make it work. And I think after Steve died, I think they started to put too many features on it.
Yeah.
Because I had some problems with it losing voicemails. I talked to other people. They've had the same problem, especially after it's been in airplane mode or it's gotten out of range. Love the camera to pieces. I couldn't believe it. I was just going click, click, click at that launch. I couldn't believe the pictures I was getting. I just held it up there. I didn't know what it was going to do. And that little autofocus went right in on the rocket. I couldn't believe it. Really, really wonderful. You see, and I'm playing that back in my mind. And we also need to have the humanities. They show a different kind of thinking. But you have to figure out how the different minds can work together. The artist designed the interface. The engineers made the innards of the phone work. You have to have both. Another reason why we have to have visual thinkers is to prevent accidents like Fukushima. The Fukushima nuclear power plant accident was a colossal visual thinking mistake. So elementary, I can't believe they did it. I can't design a nuclear power plant. All I need to know about it is that the emergency cooling pump doesn't run when I need it. You have meltdown. And with disastrous results. It's not a good idea when you live next to the sea to put that super important electrically operated pump in a non-waterproof basement. I am not kidding. That's what happened. Watertight doors would have saved it. It's the simple kind of stuff that when I was working in construction, I used to buy. This is simple stuff. I visualize risk. They calculate it. You need to have both. This is what Thomas Edison had to say about mathematics. I'm not a mathematician, but I can always hire some mathematicians. They can't hire me. And if you think what I'm telling you is just a bunch of foolishness, in my book, The Autistic Brain, I'll give you the science to show you that actually is a photorealistic visual thinker that thinks in pictures like me, and a pattern thinker that's mathematical. That would be Stephen Hawking. So you got these little kids that can do their math in their head, let them do it in their head. That's how Stephen Hawking thinks. Now I'm worried about strict algebra requirements, screening out the visual thinkers. We already talked about Fukushima. We also need visual thinkers in research. When I review a journal article, the thing that I look at is the method section. And I was reading about some cancer studies that came out with opposite results. Because one set of researchers shook their samples super hard, the other people just did this to them. It completely changed the results. Little differences in the methods make a big difference. There's different ways that you can teach math, more verbally or more visual spatial. What's important is the outcome. I spent 25 years in construction. I would sell that job. I'd draw up the drawings. I'm going to show you my sales stuff. I'd supervise construction, and then I had to make it work. There's an urgency in construction. You gotta make it work. You're working for Bose. You want to make sure that when he plugs that brand new headset in, or she plugs it in, it works. That's all the customer cares about. Okay, origami, a great thing for the pattern thinker. Now, people that think more mathematically, if I ask them something like visualize a church steeple, they sometimes get things of motion of people praying, or a verbal person just gets a pointy thing. I only see specific ones. I've also talked to a guy yesterday at the airport that is a total auditory learner. If I asked him to visualize his office, when he's not there he can't do it, or visualize his car. Most people can visualize stuff they're super familiar with. So the reason why I said church steeple, because most people don't own them, but they're out there in the environment. You're going to see them. I already discussed the phone. And we can get people that are so over-specialized, they got no creativity. Super smart kids, too narrow. I recommend avoiding totally narrow college majors. Combine some engineering. This is what SpaceX likes. And a lot of engineering stuff. They like engineering mixed up with computer science. Maybe throw some biology in there too. Mix and match. SpaceX is hiring. Only need undergraduate degrees, computer science, engineering mixed together. I checked out their whole job board. If you want to major in philosophy, let's have some business classes in there. I got to make you more employable. In my own case, I did animal behavior, psychology, and I did some neuroscience. But what I actually do is industrial design. There's two parts of engineering. There's the industrial design side and the mathematical side. And the industrial design side doesn't get enough benefit. Yes, let's say I'm shopping for watertight doors in Fukushima. I go try them out. And as soon as they show me, okay, here are the doors that got the right pressure rating and stuff like that. And I'm going to buy the door where I need absolutely no training to shut it correctly. And if I have to be Godzilla the gorilla to open and shut it, I ain't buying that one either. No training. I got to walk up to it. It's got to be obvious when it's closed correctly. Now let's make me think about the CRJ aircraft. Worst aircraft door in the world. I have had 3 flights canceled because that door did not close correctly. I can tell when a CRJ door closes correctly. And I've seen a pilot try to shut it 10 times, and I'm like, oh, we're getting a canceled flight. It's just a piece of crap, the CRJ door. It's bad design. Okay, let's not get too over-specialized. Isaac Asimov's had some good things to say about over-specialization. A degree is the first step down a ruinous highway. You don't want to waste it, so you go into doctoral research, and you end up a thoroughgoing ignoramus on everything in the world, except for one subdivisional sliver of nothing. Okay, what's going to get replaced by artificial intelligence? I wouldn't bother studying radiology. But I think the things that you guys do are not going to get replaced. It's going to be the kind of stuff that's going to be hard for AI to replace. I wouldn't want to spend 10 years in medicine studying oncology. I think what's in the computer is going to replace you. It's already happening in China already. iPhone apps that can diagnose melanoma. And the way it works, it uses bottom-up thinking. And I go, wow, this is the same way I think. I get all this knowledge, I sort it into categories. And of course, it's taught to sort melanoma from non-melanoma, for example. But I take information and I put it in categories. I think one of the ways to help people on the spectrum on the black and white thinking is you have to have more than one category. You might have 4 categories. Really bad, a little bit bad, okay, something where you categorize into more than one category. Top-down verbal thinkers overgeneralize. They'll say, what do I do about autistic kids? Well, I don't know. I don't know their age. I'm going to give you a different answer for 3-year-olds than I am for, teenagers. I have to have more information. Top-down thinkers that are verbal. Gross overgeneralization about things. Also, my thinking is sensory-based, it's not word-based. I see it first, then I hear it. Now I hear the airplane passenger. He's saying it quietly, but he's saying some not very nice words about the brand new headset that doesn't work. And he's not happy, and he's very grumpy for the whole rest of the flight. Here's the ultimate bottom-up thinking for medical research. We're not making any hypothesis up front. We're using the patient-derived data to make the hypothesis. That's exactly how I think. I'm going, wow, the more I'm reading about AI, I'm finding out that is how I think. It's bottom-up, not top-down. And machine learning is now going to really take over materials science, inventing new materials. Now, in animal behavior, being a visual thinker helped me because it was obvious to me to look at what the cattle were looking at. And when the cattle refused to walk through the chutes, I noticed they'd walk at a coat on a fence, a reflection, a vehicle parked alongside the chute, things that most people didn't pay attention to. It was obvious to me. And when I first started, I didn't know other people didn't think visually. I thought everybody was a visual thinker. I didn't know that my thinking was different. It's been an interesting journey learning that. How many people know what that is? Those are eclipse shadows. When eclipse is on our campus, 90–95% eclipse shines through the trees. The tree branches act like pinhole cameras. And you can see the little tiny eclipses. I noticed these shadows. I didn't know eclipses did this. Other students were just walking over it. I noticed it. This was on the sidewalk right in front of our library at class change time. I noticed that something was strange about the shadows. And 40 years later, I still have to talk to people about taking chains out of cattle handling facilities. Why do I have to keep talking about it? Because people aren't seeing. So now I give you written checklists. Or maybe little yellow pieces of tape to scare the cattle. And we got to make sure we give them a non-slip floor. All right, let's see how good you got. Good observation. Raise your hand if you saw that that animal was looking at the sunbeam. Oh, we're doing lousy. Real lousy. And you know who does super well on this? Elementary school kids. I can use the exact same slides, show it to elementary school kids, and half the hands go up. Because they are more visual thinkers. I showed it at Fermi Lab to all the mathematicians. Don't see it. Mathematicians calculate. Visual thinkers see risk. I see this angry passenger. And he's really mad about the headset now. He's got 10 more hours of flight to go. On a night flight, he's not happy. Even though he's in Polaris business class on United. You see, I tend to think specific. Okay, animal memories are specific because they're sensory-based, not word-based. I tell people, you want to understand animal behavior? Get away from words. What does it see, smell, hear? It's a sensory-based world. Now we get into the whole thing about emotions. Yep, I've got emotions. But I remember crying for an entire flight when I read an article about Ed Stone, the scientist that is still monitoring the Voyager space probe. Something like 40 years later, it still works. Yeah, they bootleg the very best parts. Okay, we got to get the job done. And it's leaving the solar system, and we may find out why Earth is a Class M planet. But the problem is, they've lost all their funding. They've been kicked out of NASA. Their control room is now in a strip mall. He goes there every day. Yes, we may learn why we have life on Earth. He may be able to learn that. I don't understand some of the physics of how they can learn this, but I got very emotional about this. You see, it's seeking knowledge. Seeking knowledge. I get really, really choked up about that. And then it takes some nice pictures of Saturn along the way. And there is, he's probably He's 81, he's probably 82 now. These slides are about a year old. Still going there every day, seeking knowledge. And he says, yes, I got some nice young 50-year-olds that I'm training on the technology. And I think they keep their data on 8-track tapes. You're talking ancient here. It's the urge to explore. So I got extremely emotional when I read about this New York Times magazine. I cried for the whole entire flight. And I tore the article out and I kept it. Let's start working on teaching kids to work. Middle school kids walking dogs, selling cookies, running yard sales, volunteer jobs. You know, a lot of moms can't let go on letting their kids do the most simple, safe stuff. Now again, I remember specific examples. I remember talking to a mom with a 16-year-old who looked like he ought to go work for Aspiritech or go work for Silicon Valley. This kid had never shopped. And I suggested that he buy some printer paper, and Mom burst into tears and started crying. She says, I can't let go. Buying printer paper? I mean, I was buying little things when I was 7 years old, and I knew exactly what I could buy with 50 cents. I could buy 5 comics, but if I wanted a 69-cent airplane, I had to save for 2 weeks. I was learning that at a very, very young age. Here's jobs I had. 13 years old, mother got me a job with a freelance seamstress. I took apart dresses and hemmed them. I was cleaning horse stalls at 15. I was roofing at 16, totally illegal now. Man, I love it. Sign painting, and I had to make signs other people would want. See, that's the beginning of a freelance business. And then I did college internships before we had college internships. My mother helped set some of these up. She knew that I had to get out and do things. And on one of the internships, I had to rent a house with another lady, and I did pharmaceutical experiments on mice. And while I was in high school, I got kicked out of regular 9th grade. I went to a special boarding school for gifted kids with autism and emotional problems. And I did lots of carpentry work. I cleaned a lot of horse stalls, and no studying. But you know what? I learned how to work in a really expensive school of horse barn management. Then when I was working on my master's, I was painting signs at the Arizona State Fair. And how did I get this job? I walked up to an old sign painter and I showed him my portfolio of signs. You show the work. And there's my sign painting truck. This brings up driving. Let's talk about learning how to drive. My aunt's ranch, it was 3 miles up to the mailbox and 3 miles back. By the end of the summer, I'd done 200 miles before we touched traffic. You see, this solves the problem with the brain having problems with multitasking, with low working memory capacity. Learn how to drive, train the motor memory before we touch traffic. So what I'm recommending is 20 minutes a day, that's how long it took to go up to the mailbox and back country roads, subdivisions at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when they're deserted, big parking lots. Do that for about 20 minutes a day, burn up a tank of gas, then we start doing some little tiny baby traffic. Driver's ed chucks them in the deep end way too quick. Now, you don't want to do that. You got to train that motor memory first, just on car operation, before we do traffic. I can't emphasize that enough. Because if I hadn't known how to drive, there would have been no way for me to have done my cattle stuff. That required driving. Favorite classes? Loved my animal behavior class. I also loved my English literature class. I thought I was going to hate it, but I ended up loving it. Because we'd read the original texts of some classical writing, and the professor described what the authors were trying to communicate, kind of the deeper meaning. And then I had to take this stupid exercise class called body mechanics, which I absolutely despised. It was totally worthless. But sometimes you got to do some stupid things like that. Good teachers. I had a great science teacher. I had Ann out on the ranch. And I had a great contractor that recognized my abilities, and he seeked me out. Again, that's looking at the work. So what would happen to me today? I got excellent early intervention. Really excellent speech therapy, early intervention. I didn't talk until I was 4. I'd be a prime candidate for video game addiction. Well, a little bit of video games I've played, it's a drug. I've seen lots of books on the planes, but I'm appalled at, you mean this lady sitting beside me actually did play solitaire for 3 hours, for a 3-hour flight on her phone? That's disgusting. You know, I saw one person's iPad or some kind of tablet, and they played Candy Crush, that when I looked at the reflection in the screen, I could see the spots from that game on her screen. Maybe you could do something a little better to enrich your mind on a flight than doing that. But fortunately, I'm seeing lots of books. We've got to work on the work experience. Another thing I don't like is too many kids are defining themselves by their label. I don't like that. I'm a college professor first, a designer, a cattle handling behavior person. That comes first. Autism secondary. But I'm seeing too many kids where their total life is defined by the label. I didn't write anything about autism until I'd been in the cattle industry for 10 years. Until I'd gotten established in the cattle industry. Don't become your label. Here's a scientist's reaction to taking hands-on classes out of the schools. This was in the Nature journal. Practical experiments teach kids the reality of science with all its frustrations. Practical things don't always work. Okay, you do the projects in Calling All Minds. Some of the stuff you're going to have to experiment with it to get it to work. Also, the book has famous inventor biographies and patents in it. And it's also got all my aviation experiments in there. My 7- and 8-year-old aviation experiments. We got kids today that don't know how to hook up a garden hose. We've got kids today that have never used a ruler. I talked to a guy on a plane. I talked to lots of people at the airport. He ran oil rigs. He had some workers that didn't know what a garden hose was. This is really getting bad. Now it's fun to look around inside my brain, and I found out that I've got a really big visual thinking circuit. So there's another picture of it. But here you can see the trashed out algebra department. And I have no working memory. You cannot load working memory. Long strings of verbal information don't work. I need to write down step by step. If there's a task that involves a sequence, I need to write down a pilot's checklist, step by step, of what I have to do. You know, and then on jobs, okay, what is the outcome? You're going to debug this software to make sure, well, this is pretty straightforward. No matter what phone or whatever you try this headset on, it will work on it. That's pretty simple. What the outcome is. No matter what device it's used with, it better work. That's a real straightforward outcome. Okay, let's say it's programming. Then you say, I want you to design a program using this platform, this much memory, this type of hardware that does such and such. In other words, a very clear outcome. I think another thing, I was out at a tech company and they're hiring, they had a man that had autism and he had problems with prioritizing things. The black and white memory, we got to show him how to divide priorities up into maybe 4 categories. So if you see a work colleague at dinner and you get all excited about that, that's like it doesn't matter category. So you spend an extra 5 minutes talking to her. That's not something to get upset about. Not getting your work done on time, that's top priority. Getting to work, not missing the bus. Something like that. That's much higher priority than whether a work colleague met you in a restaurant and delayed whatever you're going to do for 5 minutes. So we talked about there's a category of not important. You know, like maybe you have 4 categories of how important stuff is. That's what we do in cattle lameness scoring. You have 4 categories. Normal, lame keeps up with the buddies when they're walking. Lame does not keep up with the buddies and can barely walk. Okay, one advantage in the cattle industry is no academic barrier of entry. That's also true for tech and for anything with programming. If you can do it, you're hired. Show off the work, you're hired. And how did I get around the algebra requirement? 67, it wasn't required. The national standard was finite math, mainly statistics and probability. And I entered college on probation, and I worked hard. My mother pounded open the back door of the college. Okay, educated life, my art ability was always enhanced, always encouraged. Take the thing the kid's good at, build on it. There's too much emphasis in special ed on deficits, and not enough emphasis on building up the talent area. Now, yeah, I bet there's some work on deficits. You know, in order to survive, a kid's got to have a 6th grade level reading level. Let me give you 2 little tricks for dyslexia. that works sometimes. Colored paper. Try printing a homework on different colored papers. Try different fonts. Lavender, light blue, gray, tan, real pale colored papers. Just try that. Maybe try mess around with the background colors on the computer. Also try a piece of cardboard with a slot in it. They can move up and down the text and experiment with different size slots. Those are two simple things you can try that sometimes work. And they're so simple and so safe and so cheap, you might as well just try them. When I was a little kid, my favorite book was about inventors. So that's why in Calling All Minds, I've got inventor biographies in there. I got my grandfather's autopilot patent in there. Now that's a good example of two minds working together. There's a guy called Andunikian who came up with this crazy idea for an autopilot sensor. There was 3 stationary little magnetic coils. Kind of think cochlear, semicircular canals in the ear idea. That's probably where it came from. You can see the relationship there. The aviation specialists thought it was completely nuts. They were trying to hook the plane's autopilot directly to the magnetic compass. Can you imagine? It'd be like that. If you've ever worked with a magnetic compass. And my grandfather, MIT-trained engineer, goes, I can make this work. So he worked with this guy on this crazy idea. And I think Andunikian was probably on the autism spectrum. And they worked in a loft over the place where they fixed the trains. And they tinkered and tinkered and tinkered. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it went crazy. They finally realized the big metal trains going under their workbench was messing up the magnetic field. They got it away from the trains and then it worked. That's two minds working together right there. Early exposure to career interests. Experimental psychology class, animal behavior class. There was one thing I was good at. I was a good writer. I am seeing a lot of problems today, college student writing skills. And the reason for that is they didn't have people copy edit the work, mark up the work, correct it, and then they can go back and correct it. I was a dreadful student. But by the time I was in 9th grade, my writing was better than some of the college students. And that was important. Because I went up to that editor and I got his card. And then I wrote about my projects. But that's how I spread it. I wrote about everything I did. I put it out there and gave it away. Don't get too worried about your intellectual property. There's only one way to stay ahead. You stay ahead. Okay, stuff under development I didn't write about. But once it was out there in the plan, everybody knew about it anyway. I would write about it. I became a writing machine. And that's something you need to do for Aspiritech. Write about how you make it work. What are some of the pitfalls where you can have problems? Okay, we were discussing at lunch about these people need support. That's vague. What do you mean by support? Tell me what you mean by that. No, if I can't visualize it, support. I'm now seeing some beams holding up a building. I don't think that's the kind of support that we're thinking about. Now, when you're weird, you have to learn to sell your work. I would simply lay the work out. And here is the portfolio I used to sell Cargill. Early on in my work, I laid it on the desk, just like the movie showed it. That's the drawing right there that I sent to Bill Fielding of Cargill in the late 80s. This is pre-internet. It's a cattle handling facility for a meat plant. What I basically did is to show him my work in a 30-second wow. Something he could open up, wow. Or if it was a live interview, I'd lay the drawings out, and then I had a very professional brochure. There was nothing about autism on it. Now that showed the 3 types of jobs I could do: ranch, feedlot, or meat plant. Now I made sure the drawings and the pictures, he was meat plant. So I just showed him meat plant stuff. You know, you wouldn't show some other wrong kind of software to Bose. You're going to show them stuff they'd be interested in. And then I showed them pictures of jobs. This is the original dip-vat project I designed back in the 70s. And there's the one they made for the movie. Really cool. They duplicated my jobs from the real drawings. And there's 2 of my jobs starting. Now I found that spending 25 years selling jobs, drawing them up, supervising construction, and starting them up, it's all about outcomes. Where is a student 10 years after high school? He better not be in the basement on Social Security playing video games. when he ought to be at Aspiritech or at Google or at Microsoft or some other place. Or if he's more my kind of mind, I'm more the skilled trades mind. Yeah, and don't stick your nose up at skilled trades. Here's my center track restrainer system. This is a piece of equipment I've developed. It's in all the big plants. Half of all the cattle in North America are handled in this. Look at that steel work. Stupid people don't build that. And one of the things I'm worried about is losing these skills. I'm horrified at the condition of infrastructure. I saw a bridge last night in the dark that didn't look very nice. And I was doing a book tour for Calling All Minds, and we were somewhere outside of Chicago and went under a concrete bridge, one of those old arch ones, with steel things holding it up, weird cables bolted on it to hold it together. Man, your infrastructure here in Illinois, it is disgusting. And then, about 6 weeks ago, we had an autism conference at the Sheraton in Pittsburgh. They had no water. Entire hotel with no water.
It's unreal.
We came this close to a 900-person conference on porta potties. Fortunately, they got the water back on. Brown crud came out of the faucets, but they got it back on. Pittsburgh Sheraton. Then my book publisher for Calling All Minds put me up in a really classy hotel in New York that had no hot water because Con Edison had something broken in the street. Yeah, I am very concerned. We're losing know-how on infrastructure. You know, fancy condo, fancy big apartment building won't be very nice without electricity and water, especially without water. That's the worst. And you need people to fix equipment in these factories. Yeah, the people that are quirky and different, they're the ones who can fix anything, build anything. And there's the original dip vac drawings. So what I would do when I go into a client is I'd like take a big drawing, it was a 2 foot by 3 foot drawing, just lay it on the table, sell that work. I never said anything about autism. I just laid the work out on the table. And then I'd say, here are pictures. Here's satisfied clients. And here's my brochure. Nothing about autism on it. I think sometimes we need to play that down. Just work on selling the work. You're going to be the best. And Bose is never going to have a headphone that's going to not work. Yeah, because of some computer issue. And these are more of the drawings I would send to clients. So I sent Bill Fielding the drawing, the brochure. I'd send him this picture. He got this picture. These are 2 of the pictures I actually sent in the original portfolio. That was ranch. I wouldn't have sent him that because he's meat plant. That's ranch. Now, half the cattle are now handled in equipment I designed. Now, the thing that I found when I was young, I thought I could fix everything in the world with engineering. The other half of the equation is management. Because half my clients tore up my stuff and wrecked it. That was very, very, very discouraging. Then I developed a very simple evaluation system for the equipment. And the thing that's the trick is what are the critical control points to evaluate? What are the really important things? And I worked with various companies like McDonald's and Wendy's on implementing this. And the number one reason why stunning would not work in a meat plant was broken equipment. We had to just go through these plants and make them fix stuff. And out of 75 plants, only 3 had to build something expensive. Everything else we fixed with simple stuff. Lots of non-slip flooring went in. Lots of stuff with lighting, because cattle are afraid of the dark. There's my center track restrainer system. If you want to see this work, you can look up Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin. This is a piece of equipment I developed. But I worked with really skilled, quirky millwrights and steel workers who built the equipment. Quite a few of them on the autism spectrum. There's some of these guys own metal fabrication companies. This is what makes me go crazy as I go back and forth between autism and then I go out in the construction world. Yeah, they're all retiring now. Who's going to replace them? So I measured 5 simple things. It's like traffic rules for meat plants. You got to figure out what 5 things you're going to measure. I love the critical control point approach because you pick out the things that are really important. In using the critical control point approach, I want to get you thinking this way. If you could only enforce 3 traffic rules, for maximum public safety, which 3 traffic rules would you enforce? Okay, give me some ideas here. Stopping, yes, definitely. Red light and stop sign, yes, definitely, okay? Speed. Okay, but almost every group where I've asked this doesn't come up with the 800-pound gorilla first, drunk driving. And then I'm going to put for 4 and 5 texting and seatbelts. But the reason why I don't put seatbelts in the top 3, they protect me, but they don't protect you against me. If I'm a terrible driver, seatbelts save me. They don't help you very much if I run into you. So that's why they're not in the top 3. But I'll have people say, like failure to use a turn signal when you change a lane. Yeah, that's important. But it's not a critical control point. It's a process developed in food safety. Because the thing that they learned when we first started doing really getting into food safety in the early 90s is you can't measure everything in the plant. You have to figure out what part of the process is really the most critical stuff to measure. So we measure things like vocalization. Cattle mooing when you handle them, something nasty's happening. That's a very sensitive measure for trouble, like poking with too many prods, slamming doors on them, just doing something really nasty to them. Falling down, that can be rough handling, or it can be slippery floors. See, they're outcome variables. See, traffic rules don't tell you how to build a car. It is outcome. Construction's all about outcome. You've got to start looking more at long-term outcome in education. That's true for all education. So when we first started, only 30% of the plants could shoot 95% on the first shot because equipment was broken. We had to make them go in and fix it. Lack of maintenance. People were really surprised that lack of maintenance was a problem. That's a management issue. It's not an equipment issue. It's management. The thing I found is people want the magic thing more than they want the management. Like in schools, for example, people thought if we put internet in the schools, that's going to make the schools wonderful. That didn't work. That doesn't replace good teaching. Teaching's the management side of it. So let's look at who actually builds a big factory, whether it be a meat plant or some other kind of big factory, like a car plant. And I've been in a lot of factories. And the visual thinkers like me, in the drafting department, we lay out the whole entire plant. Design a lot of the workflows for conveyors and things like that. That quirky guys down in the shop invent the new equipment. Lots of visual thinkers, kind of autistic, dyslexic people there. And the formal trained mathematical engineers, we need you. Boilers, refrigeration, roof truss loading, soil compaction. You see, you need to have all the different minds to build a really good factory. Now I'm thinking about the mess at the Denver airport. $42 million mess. They sloped the gate aprons into the building. So our famous alien tunnels are full of rats and mold. $42 million to rip out foot-thick concrete slabs. I was looking at it just the other day. I go, man, they got a great concrete cutting saw. They can cut foot-thick concrete with that. But pretty expensive mess because it sloped the floor, the slabs the wrong way. Yes, I've been watching that at the airport. It makes me angry every time I see it. But when the thing is, when you start learning about how there's different kinds of minds, you have to think about how they can work together, how the skills complement each other. And the first step is knowing that people think differently. So going back to the iPhone, for example, the artist made the interface easy to use. The mathematically trained engineer makes the innards work, so that when you go like that, it actually works. You see, that's a perfect example of the different kinds of minds doing stuff. And we've got to make sure educators don't screen out some of these unique minds. Well, now it's time to do lots of questions, and I hope I don't get in another coughing fit. I'm really sorry about the coughing. But if you can edit out the coughing fit, I'd really appreciate it. And let's just do lots of different questions.
Not my job.
And I'm going to be really interested to go to your, gotta get another coffee.
We don't know where our second mic is, so people
Okay, we're just
have
going to have to talk loud.
We can talk loud, or we can just get exercise walking back and forth. Alex, can you
Yeah, you want
I just got to get another coffee up here.
take your time,
I'm
please?
about ready to go to the coffee fit.
Thank you, Dr. Grandin, so
Well,
much.
Let's just do questions here. Okay. Okay, questions right here. Or you can just say it loud, I'll repeat it. I think it's not that big a room.
A lot of people see you as a hero and a role model and someone to put on a pedestal. And you're
Oh, let me tell you, when I was working in construction, I wasn't on a pedestal. When I worked in construction, I was invisible. And they would do bad things to animals in front of me because I was in construction. I've been through the bad plant manager. We're on startup, a new piece of equipment, 4 hours of swear words, only one word in his vocabulary. Been there. Wasn't in a pedestal when I worked in construction, that's for sure.
And in particular, you've been a beacon of hope to parents who otherwise didn't really see much of a future for their children.
And you look like a regular Silicon Valley guy. You see, the thing is, it's an advantage being a visual thinker. I don't think in the word doesn't mean anything. Oh, well, he looks like someone with, like a guy I saw in the shop, or somebody that I saw at a tech company, or somebody I was at a Rockwell Automation conference, and I talked to him. You know, I'm seeing the engineer was almost crying when he told me I'm one of those granddads who's on the spectrum, you know, and had a really good career.
My question is, do people ever come to you with looking for answers that you can't give?
Answers I can't give?
And
You didn't have to give me a specific example. I don't think in generalities. Okay, give me an example of a question I can't answer. Okay, ask me something about Stephen Hawking's Penrose geometry and how to do it. I don't know. All I know is he does it in his head, and he says, I did something my disability doesn't affect.
What I'm wondering is, people come to you hoping that they can guarantee some future for their kid, and you have to tell them.
Well, first of all, that's too general. If someone asked me if I could guarantee a future for the kid, I'm going to have to sit down there for about 15 minutes, and I want to ask a lot of questions, because I got to get some idea of level. You know, there's some individuals we're working for Aspiritech, you know, on the program testing. No, they would not be able to do that. So I've got to get some idea of age. You know, can they read? I mean, I've got to know some basic things about them. But even some of the ones that have more severe problems, there's jobs that they can do. I heard a story about a guy who had actually been in an institution, and a doctor got him out of the institution and taught him how to make coffee, and his job was the coffee man at the gas station. And he was appreciated for his really good coffee. And that was real work, a real job. It wasn't a fake work thing. Fake work, you don't ever do fake work. You've got to be doing real work. So I have to get much more specific information and then figure out what's a reasonable future. Physics and chemistry is not a reasonable goal for me. I cannot do the math. Industrial design is a reasonable job. That's basically what I've done with the CAD. It's a field called industrial design. It's the visual side of designing stuff. Steve Jobs is basically an artist and an industrial designer. So I have to have a lot more information. See, the problem we got with the autism name is you're going from Einstein and Thomas Edison and famous musicians and artists to somebody who can't dress themselves. That's the problem. You've got such a broad spectrum. And I'm seeing smart kids like you where they aren't learning shopping. That's something I learned when I was 7 and 8 years old. You know, just the most basic things like that. You know, I'm seeing too many kids becoming the label. And now when it comes to anxiety, you know, I take antidepressants. I wouldn't be here now if I wasn't on antidepressants. If you want to read about that, it's in my book, Thinking in Pictures. And I started taking them when I was in my early 30s. You know, then you get into the whole issue about the developing brain. Well, I was past that point. My anxiety got worse as I got older. The colitis attacks cleared up when I went on the medication. It's, you You know, and I got out there and worked on my cattle stuff. You have to work hard. There's two things you got to do. You have to work hard. But another thing you have to do is see the door. That's why that scene in the movie where I get the card, that's real. There's some stuff in the movie that kind of fictionalized, but that's real. Is seeing that if I got that card and I started writing for that magazine, I could really get my stuff out of there. And then that got me a press pass into the meeting with the hundreds of dollars registration fee. And I got the cards for the national magazines.
Hey, so you talk about the support, so it's not a beam. What we do in Aspiritech, the support is 90% or 80% about anxieties.
Oh, anxiety?
Yeah, that's most of the support.
Well, I have anxiety. Let me tell you two things I used to be afraid of. Public speaking and airplanes. I'm not kidding.
Specific anxieties, but this is where the main reason we have the support.
The anxiety is the, now most of your people that are working in Aspiritech are older adults. There's some people that are going to need to take medication. I've worked with
That's
designers.
exactly what I'm going to, and that's the question. What I see is the amount of medication that our people.
Well, you can put people on too much medication.
So I want to know your take about medication.
Well, basically, the younger the brain, the more conservative you need to be. Once you get past 25, the brain's developed. I've worked with visual thinking designers professionally in the meat industry, 3 different ones. And a low dose of Prozac kept them off the drugs and alcohol. There is a place for conservative, careful use of medication. I would not be here today without medication. I would have been ripped apart, stress-related health problems, and these colleagues of mine would have been in the gutter on drugs and alcohol. So, careful, conservative use. The other thing with anxiety is you're going to have to keep broadening your world. Okay, how did I get over being afraid of airplanes? I had to make them interesting. Interesting. Oh yes, I read all about that plane where they flew into the hail and they smashed the radar nose cone, all the pieces on it. I'm sure the radar didn't work after they did that. I talked to some pilots about that. One pilot told me that they couldn't see it on the radar, and another pilot told me they were total idiots. I don't know. I kind of have to make that interesting. I'm more likely to get in a car accident. And I have been in minor car accidents going to and from the airport. You know, but I had to get it to make it interesting. And the plane I was most afraid of has a funny name. This plane's called a Fokker. You've got to say that very, very carefully. That is actually the name of an airplane. A 1960s propeller-driven commuter plane. And public speaking, I walked out of my first talk. You know what I learned? Have really good slides. Then if you panic, you can fall back on your slides. Or if I don't have slides, I have a checklist, the things to talk about, like bullet points. But you have to do it. The medication works on the primitive parts of the brain. You know, cognitive works on the top. You've got to hit the brain both from the top and the bottom. And you've got to get them out doing things. You can't just let them retreat. They've got to do things. And I can remember being anxious about all kinds of things, and Mother had a very good sense of how to push me, stretch me. I call it stretching. Stretching me to do new things. Because a lot of the people I worked with were highly anxious.
Social media, Facebook, something the younger generation faces today.
Oh, and you get bullying on Facebook. That's horrible. Because when I was in high school, when I did horseback riding, model rockets, and electronics, I was not bullied. They were refuges from bullying. Well, now today, I'd have my phone with me and somebody be texting bullying over the phone.
But what about specifically from the addictive qualities?
We have got to control the screen time. We have got to control it. Because some of these kids are going nowhere. All right, I can tell you 3 places I don't want kids going. Non-stop video games in the basement, dead or in jail. All right, those are 3 outcomes I don't want. You see, construction really affects how I think. You have to get the job done. There's also an urgency in construction. I talked to too many parents and I suggested a kid get a job and they said, we're thinking about it. I said, I'm in construction. You got to order the steel. There's a point where you gotta do. And I've pushed a lot of parents, you gotta get your kid a job. And I'll say, know anybody that runs a shop, a little independent shop? Grease the skids, get them in there. Bypass the interview process. You know, you gotta get it done. Because the anxiety stuff gets worse. They hole up in the basement, it just gets worse.
So one of the things I'm noticing with parents today is that...
Speak up.
Sorry. Is this better?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, just speak up so people can hear you.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm noticing with parents today is that they always talk about how brilliant their kids are, and I'm noticing this as...
Well, yeah, but the brilliant kids got to get out and do something. I don't want to hold up in the basement. And I'll tell you something I don't want. It makes me sick.
What?
Daddy works for Boeing or some other big aero engineering company, and he plays video games every weekend with his son. His son's holed up playing video games, didn't learn one droplet of engineering.
I hate video
And that
games.
makes me crazy.
So anyway, the point I wanted to make is that these mothers talk about how smart their kids are, and they have all of these networks and these friends, and they're putting them on Social Security, which, by the way, I just got off. Thank you so much.
Well, they're putting them on Social Security. We want to be, I'm seeing people getting coached on how to get on Social Security, and a really smart kid ought to be working for a tech company.
I know.
I mean, this is what makes me crazy. I've been to Microsoft, I've been to Google, I've been to SAS, I've been to Rockwell Automation.
Yeah.
I have given talks, this same talk basically at different tech companies, and I see older people that are definitely on the spectrum all over it. This is what makes me crazy, is I go back and forth between the tech world, the skilled trades world, and the cattle world, and the autism world.
Yeah.
And the people of my generation, basically the ones that had no speech delay, they all had jobs.
I know. I have a job. I work at a university myself.
And the other thing, the thing about the autistic mind, since it's a bottom-up thinker, is you fill the database with information. You can then sort into more fine categories and not be as rigid. If you don't fill the database, then you're going to have a real difficult time. We've got to get out and do things.
Yeah, well, and the other part that bugs me too is that these parents, again, they boast about how smart their kids are, and they're sticking them on these work programs, and they're keeping them down.
Well, the thing is, the other thing I see on some of these work programs, there are a lot of kids where bagging groceries when you're 16 is good, just job training to learn the discipline of work. And you might have somebody with Down syndrome or something like that where bagging groceries is a suitable career. And then you've got another kid where it's not a suitable career. You see, people are not making the differentiation.
No, they're not.
And the other thing I'm seeing is I'm seeing straight A honor students with a label, graduating with PhDs and just trash it in the workplace because they never learned how to work.
I know somebody.
And my parents spent a lot of money to send me to special boarding school, horse barn management. But I learned how to work.
I have a young cousin who's 21 years old. He's on the
He's 21 years old. We just got to make sure everybody hears.
21 years old, on the spectrum. He's going to be a senior advisor, and he really dislikes Autism Speaks because they're looking for a cure.
Okay, first of all, I want to worry about his career. Let's get out of the politics. All right, he's 21 years old, and what's he doing?
He's going to be a senior advisor. He's a history major.
What's he done for work experience?
Oh gosh, he's very political. So he has worked for campaigns. He met when he was young the Clintons.
I can tell you I avoid politics. It's like, I don't want to walk and step in it.
But it's a brain. He's going to law school, but he gets very, very upset that they're trying to find a cure for autism.
First of all, I think it'd be a good idea to drop a lot of the autism stuff and start worrying about his career.
Well, I think he's very comfortable in his own skin, and that's why he feels like, why are we looking for a cure? I'm okay the way I am.
Well, the thing is, there's new research. There's a paper called Genomic Trade-Offs. Is autism the steep price we pay for human brain? That is an actual paper. 2018, I pulled it off of Google Scholar. Another paper is our solitary mammals as a model for autism. Okay, now you take lions, for example. They're much more social than tigers and panthers. And when you look at some of the neurotransmitter stuff, there's crossover with autism. Does that mean that a panther or a leopard, which is more solitary, is defective compared to a lion? This is where it's normal variation. And this is brand new research. This is absolutely new stuff within the last year. And it's the same genetics that makes us have a big brain. And the system that makes us have a big brain is not a stable system. Because there's an even newer paper, which I don't remember, I think I've got a copy of it in my notebook, where the way we have a big brain is a thing called a notch gene. And what a notch gene does is it keeps the stem cells from differentiating the brain tissue longer. So you grow this big, huge blob of stem cells, and then they turn into brain tissue. And that's what makes human beings have a big brain. It's not a stable system. That's why you have autism and schizophrenia. And another thing you throw in that mix is epilepsy. That also gets chucked into that mix. This is what the latest research says. So if you cured that, well, maybe we won't have a big brain anymore. I mean, this is what, now, you also have got a lot of, we're looking at some of the genomic stuff. And I went in, I'm on a project right now, and I've done the whole coding DNA analysis. Boy, I learned why I've got small, crummy little teeth, why I have horrible skin. I've got a bleeding disorder. It's not hemophilia, but if I'm put on too much warfarin after hip replacement, I'd die. I learned that from it. But when it comes to the genes and autism, yeah, there's a shank and a few other things, but it didn't really tell me that much. It explained all the physical stuff that's wrong with me. I'm glad to know about the bleeding thing, because when I have to have a hip replacement, I have to have a quarter of the dose of warfarin, or I could die. That I learned from it. And I learned why my teeth are small and horrid, and why I have skin problems. But it didn't tell me too much about the brain. Because the problem is, it's embedded. And the problem is the system that grows a big brain is not a stable system. It basically just makes a blob of extra stem cells grow, and then, okay, now it's turned into neurons. There's a lot of stuff that go wrong there, okay?
Hi, I admire you so much. Thank you for all you've done for autism and awareness and everything. I have a son that's 2.
He's 2?
No, 3.5, sorry. He
Okay.
was diagnosed when he was 2.
Okay, can he talk?
He could talk when he was diagnosed. He started
Why was he diagnosed if he could talk at age 3?
Yeah, I know, ASD.
I mean, the other problem that you've got is to get any kind of special ed service. Now, you have to have a diagnosis.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of, sort of overdiagnosis, increased detection.
Well, my question to you is, he now has 30 hours of therapy, all his waking hours.
Is he making improvements?
A huge
Good.
improvement.
Then it's working. Good.
BCBA, they're in the house.
Good. But he's making improvements, and you're doing the right. If your kid's making improvements, you're doing the right thing.
You think so?
Is he making improvements? Okay,
Yeah.
what kind of improvements is he making?
Well, he's talking.
He's talking.
He's got a huge talent for playing the piano. He's sort of.
Well, I worked on the music talent. The other thing I would do with some of these math kids, don't bore them with baby math. When he gets into school and he's bored stiff, give him the high school math book, give him the college math book. He may need special ed in reading, but go ahead and give him that higher math book. And somebody will say, well, that's too difficult to do. I go, wait a minute, I can buy a geometry book for $10 on Amazon. Don't give me an excuse. And I would, if you're the teacher, move his desk up to the front, so I know he's working on it. Maybe it's online. I'll turn him around so I can see the laptop. Maybe I don't understand it, but I need to see it. And I'm going to have to send the homework off to the high school teacher. Just do it. See, this is the thing that being in construction, you got to just do it. That's not even expensive to do. It's easy to do. And if you don't give him the harder math, he's going to be a little behavior problem because he's going to be bored stiff.
So my question, I guess, is there's applied behavioral analysis, and then there's floor time.
Okay, it all depends upon who the teacher is.
Okay.
You know what I have found when I've watched good teachers? ABA turns into floor time turns into ABA, and what is important is who that teacher is.
Okay.
And a good teacher has, I call it the knack, I know this isn't very scientific, knows just how hard to push to get progress without causing sensory overload.
Okay.
And some kids you can push them more than others. There's some kids where you kind of jerk open the front door, that was me. There's other kids you got to sneak around the back door very, very quietly and be careful not to drive them into sensory overload. So that teacher, you want me to stop?
No, I want you to take, I think, one more question. 'cause
One
we
more?
want you- do you have one more?
All right, one more question, and then I'll hang around for as long as people want to hang around. Okay, well, how about right here?
So, I've noticed that you tend to focus more on the work side of things, but...
Oh, if I didn't have a good career, I wouldn't have a life.
What I'm wondering is, well, at least in my experience, the high school that I went to was really accepting of people who are
Good.
who have different sorts of issues. But I'm just wondering, like, what is the level of like having like a positive social atmosphere?
Well, positive social atmosphere is really important. I have a book you might be interested in. It's called Different Not Less. And it's 14 old people diagnosed with Asperger's later in life, all employed, all different kinds of jobs, some tech jobs, I didn't fill it totally up with techies, employed, and the diagnosis helped them with their relationships, because a lot of them had marriages that were a mess. That was where it helped. And where there's been successful marriages, it's often been people with shared interests. You know, like two computer programmers. Friends who shared interests. When I was in high school, my friends were in horseback riding, model rockets, and electronics. Things where there was a shared interest. And you might find that book really helpful. And it's in their own words. I edited it. And the way we did it was I had kind of a contest set up on my website where people could send in their stories, and they were on a format. We did that so it wouldn't ramble so bad. And to be included, they had to have not be on Social Security and have fully, paid employment. And then they talked about their childhood, their work experience, relationships, and I got some insights from it. And it's in their own words. And there were 14 out of the 28 entries that were picked. Okay, if they were on Social Security, that was automatically thrown out. If they were, and stuff too much autism-related stuff I threw out. I wanted them out in different jobs ranging from tour guide, veterinarian, computer person, aid for working with old folks, a whole bunch of different things. And I remember the veterinarian saying that, he'd had problems with relationships. Then he said something that really resonated with me. He said, I started getting a deep satisfaction from my work. See, that gives meaning to my life. People say, well, you're straining yourself too much doing all this traveling. Well, I don't know what I was doing myself otherwise. All right, one more quick one, and then we'll sign books, and I'll hang around this. Okay, right there.
I do emphasize to people, I'm 63 on the spectrum, and that for...
And what have you done all your life?
I'm at Aspiritech right now. I'm one of the people here. Okay? I'm one of the go-getters in the place. Just ask any of the other people. But for a long time in my life, I emphasized that there was no such thing as Asperger's officially, that nobody knew what it was.
You've got to remember that on all these diagnoses, they're half science and half conference room squabbles.
Right.
Nobody is sitting in a conference room and changing the diagnosis for tuberculosis. You either got it or you don't.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just saying that, there was no literature on Asperger's in English until 1981.
Well, basically the only difference between autism and Asperger's is Asperger's has no obvious speech delay. That's the only difference.
Okay,
and to be autistic, you had to have obvious speech delay.
I know that's marked my life, not knowing exactly what my problem was for quite a while.
Well, basically the problem is, in autism is the social circuits aren't hooked up. What basically happens, you grow extra circuits back here. It's early brain overgrowth. This is what's known as science. So that could build up maybe the art department, the music department, the math department, memory, loads a ton of memory in there. But you got a 286 for a processor. You know anything about computers, I'm sure you do. And your social circuits are kind of shortchanged.
No,
that's
I have
basically what happens.
086 processor, actually. But yeah, that's the same way.
I'm a 286 processor. I got no working memory.
Yeah, I know.
I got a Google data center for memory.
Yeah.
If I can convert it to a graphics file.
Yeah.
But I can't multitask. This is the reason why on the driving,
Okay.
I want to get this long period of practice in a totally safe place to train your motor memory, your motor cortex, steering, braking, and gas before we touch traffic. And then that deals with this multitasking issue. I was lucky that mailbox was 3 miles away. And on my aunt's ranch, we had to go to it every day because she had a business.
Okay.
And she had no phone. We had to go to that mailbox.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming.